But let me pause on that for a moment and go to Kendra's question about strength. You and your brother are taking an exam. You're both, let's say, taking a math class. And the quiz is finished and the scores come back to you. Your brother has 20 out of 20 and you have 2 out of 20. You took the exam and you assume that you're going to do relatively well on the exam. And these are just assumptions that all of us carry in life. The assumption that we can do A, B, C, D. And eventually, like the prodigal son, life will give you a quiz. And there comes a point where the results are going to be given to you, at any age, doesn't really matter. And then you look at your parents as they look at your brother and they're very happy. They applaud him. They say all these nice things about him. And then they look at you and say, so what was your score? Let me see the grade. And then you realize that you don't want to show them the transcript because it's embarrassing. You're ashamed. You really, really feel bad. You have let yourself down. You have let your parents down. And so after a good amount of back and forth, eventually your mom steals away, the test from your hands, and she says, you got a 5? I thought you studied. What's wrong with you? Are you stupid? And so there is so much pressure that's now inside you. You have been caught by yourself that you're lazy, incompetent perhaps. You've been caught by your parents, the brother that you have loved for most of your life. All of a sudden, you say to yourself, how could he not just keep the grade to himself? Why did he have to be a big show-off? So you begin to resent him. Then you begin to envy him. Then you begin to become profoundly angry at him for him being the source of, your shame and regret. And so as, your parents quickly dismiss you, you go to your room, and all of a sudden you say something very strange to yourself. Kendra, study. Study really, really hard. If your brother gets a 20, you get 20 plus the extra credit, you can get 25. And then your brother can find himself in a position that you once were. So before you can look for a place where you can become strong, there is this pre-existing experience which is, I thought I was. Life happened. I got pushed to the ground. I got all bloodied and I realized I am weak. I don't want to be weak. I don't want to be bullied by life. I want to be strong. It's kind of like, life is okay. You think you're going to do well. And all of a sudden, for some strange reason, you have this enormous anxiety that's living inside and just brewing, and little by little it's just leaking everywhere. And all of us have it. It's not like, we have it to various degrees. And if you were to look at becoming strong, like building a house, well, first you need to kind of figure out what tools you need. What are some of the components you need to build this house called strength. If you want to build a shed, you need 2x4s and some nails and this and that. Strength is very much the same thing. But the question is, since we are multi-layered animals, you can be physically strong but emotionally weak. You could be physically strong, emotionally strong, but intellectually weak. And you could be physically strong, intellectually strong, emotionally strong, but psychologically, that there are certain traumas that live inside you. You don't let them out, but once they do come out, they impact the physical, they impact the emotional, they impact the intellectual. Everything falls apart. And then you come to a point where you say, I go to the gym every day, I am healthy, even though I may be 60. Emotionally, I'm tough. Intellectually, I'm tough. Psychologically, inwardly, I'm very clean for the most part. But then you get to certain areas in your life, like midlife crisis, where you say, I have everything. Mentally I'm healthy. Psychologically I'm healthy. But it feels as if spiritually I look at my life and nothing means anything. And so when you talk about strength, the question is, did you perhaps go to the doctor telling you that, your cholesterol is pretty bad, and all of a sudden you realize you're at the risk of a heart attack, and though despite all of your accomplishments, you realize physically you're weak and you want to be strong, you want to be healthy. That is one kind of strength. The other is you're physically healthy, and you think well, you read a lot of books, you're well-spoken, you're eloquent, you're articulate. And then something happens and your life turns upside down and you're just emotionally broken, which impacts your body, and your Messiah, the intellect, comes down to put the emotions together, but it doesn't. And then you say to yourself, what's the use of going to the gym? What's the use of reading all these books and giving all these talks when I myself, like every other person out there, I can't even apply the stuff I'm talking about? How do I go about making this stuff come true and live inside me? It's kind of like what we talked about earlier, which is you journey towards something. And when this thing opens its door to you, you journey inside of it. You figure out what knowledge is. You figure out what wisdom is. But you never allow the stuff to go inside you to make a home within you, you see. The four of us sitting here, physically we look relatively well, at least I hope. We are physically healthy. Emotionally we're all at different stages, and intellectually we're all different stages, The first thing is, I suppose, one needs to be clear as to what part of themselves they want to strengthen. It's in the fourth way school, what Gurdjieff used to call when it comes to knowledge, you weigh 50 pounds. You're really, really good. But when it comes to this knowledge living inside your soul, being able to apply, that when someone looks at you, they smells the wisdom that lives inside you, you only have 5 pounds. There is such an imbalance. You know a lot, you just don't feel what you know. Sometimes you feel a lot, you just don't know anything, you just feel a lot. And the task is to bring these two things together. One of the most interesting sites that I think, I'll talk about Hussein when he got really sick and then when he passed away. He hated any human being worshipping any other human being. And it had to do because of his own experience back home. It had to do with the experience here in the Bay Area. He belonged to this organization called MTO. And he knew the teacher when he was teaching back home in Iran. And he came to America because of him, only to realize that, he had died and his son had taken over, but no one told him those things. And then he first-handedly saw how the son was, that he was so ill-equipped. He was so incompetent. He just didn't know what the hell he was talking about, you know. He was kind of like Llewellyn Vaughan Lee. And I so vividly remember the last time I saw him. I knew that I'm not going to see this man anymore. And and he was sick, and he was in a lot of pain. And I bent over to just kiss, you know, his feet. And despite all the pain that lived inside his body, he just jerked his body very, very quickly. And he looked at me and he said, "No." And of course, you know, even though I wanted to, and I didn't really care what he said and how he said it, it was too late. His feet were, you know, removed. And so when he passed away, the only person who knows where he is buried, if he's buried at all, maybe he was cremated, I don't know, is his wife. Nobody else knows. And because to some extent he assumed, rightly or wrongly, that if people were to know where his graveyard is, I mean where his tombstone is, some didn't like him very much, so they would vandalize. Some liked him too much, and so they would make it a place of worship. And so this is a man who kind of applied what he believed, applied what he knew. The only really thing I can say about wisdom is what you will find in Gurdjieff's book, Meetings with Remarkable Men. I think that's the book. And it was made into a movie. It's uninteresting as a movie, but it's, you know, if you have some time. He finds himself in this monastery, and his friend tells him, stay in this monastery as long as you possibly can, so your soul and your knowledge, your essence and your being can kind of have this beautiful union, this yoga. They can mesh well, live together well. So when you go out there, nothing in the physical world can ever touch you. Nothing can ever crush you. And it's a very difficult thing to do. You know, J.G. Bennett was able to do that, at least in regards to marriage and other areas of life. You know, he had this huge property. Idris Shah looked at him. He said, "You don't understand Gurdjieff's ideas. And if you do, you don't understand them completely. You don't understand them well. Your job at this institute is done. Give me your property and go." And I don't know if, you know, J.G. Bennett was strong enough to simply sacrifice and give this mansion to him for free or sold it for cheap. But Bennett understood the reason why human beings get into relationships. You know, he knew that there is something very unique about having a conversation with your companion, having intimacy with your companion. There are these forces inside you that they just need to express themselves, not with anyone, very specific, you know, person. And so he was married about 6 or 7 or 8 times. And when his wife, the 7th one, died, 2 weeks later he got remarried, you know. And I think the only way that you can build your strength, the only way you can have, I suppose, God go inside you and just journey through you to figure out which parts of you he or she or it wants to use, is only done through understanding. You understand something really, really, really well, and it's so difficult. It's so difficult because you have to exercise so much detachment. You have to sacrifice your own desires, your own pleasures, the way you want to think about things, the way you want to fantasize about things. And I go back to something I've always said, and I believe it wholeheartedly, which is no one can do this on their own. You need, and you're not going to be able to find a teacher who's absolutely perfect, because there is no such thing under the sun. All teachers are going to be fallible. All teachers make mistakes. And because teachers are not exempt from life giving them new experiences, new insight, they themselves coming to different conclusions at different stages of life, where they come to realize everything that perhaps they've done was a mistake and they need to kind of reinvent themselves. But all that aside, I think you need someone to create a certain physical space and then a certain emotional, intellectual, psychological space. And you're going to be cut off from everything except your teacher. And you're going to be rewired. And he or she can only do that. No one else. Books can't do it. YouTubes can't do it. It's a very, very, very intimate relationship. And it's very rare, And there are, different teachers with different qualities and temperaments who do the same thing in a different way. I'm not quite sure if Gurdjieff would ever receive Irina Tweedy. I'm not quite sure if Bhai Sahib would ever receive, J.G. Bennett. So, let me just end it with this. Sometimes, it hasn't happened for a few years, but my parents have a car wash, and sometimes they say, just in case the car wash doesn't make an income and we realize that we can't pay for anything, we're not going to ask our kids for money. We came to America with nothing, and they didn't. They only had like 15, 20,000. We'll leave America with nothing. Of course, it's easier said than done, but as fantasies go, it's a nice fantasy. There is a poem by Abdullah Ansari. آن کس که تو را شناخت جان را چه کند، فرزند و زن و خانمان را چه کند. If I journey towards wisdom, i.e. God, and if I find wisdom or God, I am extremely self-sufficient, so much so that I have no need for life, so much so that I have no need for a companion, so much so that I have no need for children. He was married and he had children, but what he was saying is, if you are self-sufficient, life will eventually break us. But it won't paralyze you, because most of you is self-sufficient. If you consider the first 600 pages of Daughter of Fire, you have a woman who just breaks down all the time. She has no strength. Bhai Sahib has power over her completely. And that's about like 5 years. And then you sit back and watch her YouTubes. She is a lioness, No, I take that back. She's a lion. She roars and she's powerful. And she has no problem looking at someone in the audience and say, just shut your mouth. You're stupid. You know what you're talking about. There are points where she screams at, people. she wouldn't be able to do that. And I think that's the trick, that's the shortcut, which is find someone the difficulty with saying that is that Irina was 50. She couldn't have children anymore. Maybe she never wanted children. She was old enough to no longer be ambitious the way we are. She didn't have family. She wasn't really attached. And even if she did, she didn't really want to be around them. And she had this fantasy, which was, I want to go to India and become spiritual. Little did she know that to have that fantasy, to continue, you need someone like Eckhart Tolle, who will just continuously encourage you and tell you how right you are. But to find someone like Bhai Sahib, he's not going to encourage your fantasies, he's going to shatter them. If you find someone like that, stay with that person for 5-6 years. You can do all sorts of things. And life will break you. That's what life does. But the wisdom within you will create a cast. And eventually your legs or your arms or your heart or your mind will be healed. You'll do it on your own. It doesn't mean you won't have agonizing nights. It doesn't mean that you're not going to lose sleep. You're going to break like all of us. But you will recover much, much, much more quickly. You will have no need for therapy or medication. That's the only way that I know.